okay? Look at me. Not as young as I used to be. All right, but before I start, I just want to thank the board of Tano Tassids on Todu for inviting me to speak today and the organizers of this conference. I've watched this conference online over the years, and I'm very excited to participate for the first time. I also want to wish all of you a happy National Napping Day, but hopefully none of you will sleep through my talk. I also want to thank everyone who participated in the deep sea mining RFI these last few months. Thank you to the brave activists who spoke up first and raised the alarm. Thank you to the environmental organizations and the government servants who quickly educated themselves on this topic and then pivoted to educate our community. Thank you to everyone who attended a workshop or a community meeting or a scientific presentation. And thank you to everyone who wrote a comment, signed a petition, or a letter. And also, thank you to the people who may not have been opposed, who may not have been opposed to deep sea mining, but still took the time to listen to and talk with the people who are. I'm hard pressed to think of another community where environmental issues had this level of civic engagement, and I am proud to call the Marianas my home and all of you my family and friends. My name is Angelo Villagomez, and as always, I am grateful for the chance to stand with people who care deeply about the ocean. I'm honored to be with you, to be with family, mentors, and friends, in a conversation about home and the ocean that has shaped our past and will define our future. Let's start with a few fun photos. Can you click? All right. Please allow me to introduce you to my grandparents. On the left, we have Ignacio and Ana Villagomez, who were born in Saipan in the early 1900s. They survived World War II and had 10 kids. On the right, we have Tom and Mary O'Connor, who were born in Worcester, Massachusetts around the same time, and they had 5 kids. Can you click? My father, Ramon Garrido Villagomez, went to law school in the 1970s at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and would become one of the first Chamorro lawyers from what is now the CNMI. My mom was an undergrad across the street at Trinity College and traveled to Saipan on a Watson Foundation scholarship and became the first person to translate Chief Hurrah's speech into English. The rest is history, and that's how I came into this world. Next slide. I actually wasn't born on Saipan. I was born on Guam, but most of my Chamorro family lives on Saipan. After college, clicked through 4 times, I think. After college, I went home for a few years and worked in conservation, but I have lived and worked in Washington, D.C. as a professional ocean advocate for the last 16 years. For many years, I was one of only a handful of Pacific Islanders working in the national conservation organizations in D.C. And today, I think I'm the only Pacific Islander who works for a D.C. think tank. Someone else out there works for one, let me know because I'd like to be your friend. Can you click through 4 times? I've had a very privileged career, working at the intersection of science, policy, and community to designate marine protected areas, shark sanctuaries, help write and negotiate international agreements and advice. I've published in the scientific literature, and generally, I've been able to travel around the world, talking with people about ocean conservation and doing my best to be useful wherever ocean issues and indigenous issues overlap. Amory already mentioned a little bit of this, but today as a senior fellow at CAP, my work explores how conservation, community engagement, and indigenous governance can align to address global challenges such as habitat loss, declining fish populations, and the disproportionate impacts of climate change on island and coastal peoples. I serve on several advisory boards and as the ocean co-lead for the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, where I help elevate community-centered approaches to marine protection and access. Today, I hope to spark a conversation with all of you about how island communities, our communities, can lead the next era of ocean conservation in the United States. Next slide. My big idea for ocean conservation is that we should tap into the deep connections and love that people already feel for the sea by celebrating and protecting what I call our special ocean places. These are the spots that shape us, move us, and remind us why the ocean matters. We often have memories of important times of our lives in these places, or remember the people who were there with us. For me, that place is the Mog Lagoon. I first visited in 2009, and the experience marked me forever. Inside this ancient volcanic caldera, I watched sharks cruise through impossibly clear water, turtles rise lazily for air, tuna flash beneath the surface, and seabirds circling overhead. I saw coral reefs thriving right next to active volcanic vents, an otherworldly meeting of fire and life. Mog became my special ocean place that day. And it's the memory that I return to when I think about why people protect the ocean. Because somewhere out there is a place they love just as much. I took this picture of the boat after climbing up to the edge of the rim of the volcano. I'm not sure you're supposed to do that, but I did it. To the north, I could see the island of Yracas, and to the south, I could see the island of Asuncion, and all of the waters surrounding me were now part of the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument. These are the waters of the monument that at the time were newly protected by George W. Bush. But the islands had been protected most of my life. Next slide. On the screen is a snapshot of documents from the second CNMI Constitutional Convention in 1985. You can get a copy of this at CNMI Archives or HPO. I'm pretty sure they can get one there. During the second CNMI Constitutional Convention in 1985, several delegates played key roles in expanding constitutional protections for the northern islands of Yracas, Maug, and Asuncion. Although Maug had already been safeguarded under the original 1977 CNMI Constitution, President Herman Guerrero, Delegate Estevan King, and Delegate Ramon Villagomez, my dad, worked together to extend similar environmental and cultural protections to the remaining islands. Building on the precedent set for Maug, they supported proposals that recognize the ecological significance and the cultural heritage of Yracas and Asuncion, ensuring that these islands would be preserved for future generations. Their advocacy helped embed these protections directly into our Constitution, strengthening long-term conservation efforts across the northernmost islands of the Commonwealth. Can you do the next slide? In fact, the CNMI famously guarantees the right to a clean and healthful public environment in all areas, including the land, air, and sea. And protected areas have been a part of guaranteeing that right from the beginning of our Commonwealth. I'll also note at this point that the Commonwealth and the CNMI Constitution predate the Exclusive Economic Zone, or the EEZ. It was in 1983 when President Ronald Reagan claimed control of all waters 200 miles off the coast of the United States. So in the Pacific, the constellation of small territories overnight became vast ocean states. So that today, about 30% of all US waters are in the US Pacific territories. About 1 million square kilometers of that, which is about 10% of the total, surrounds the Marianas. But that was my dad's story. My journey with the Mariana Trench starts with the next slide. And this lady. Sinta Metogole Kaipat was my mentor. And in turn, many years before, my father was hers. Like dad and myself, Sinta left the island for many years to pursue her education, starting in high school. Sorry, I'm tearing up a little bit. Starting in high school through college and ultimately law school. Excuse me. Sinta was the first Carolinian woman from the CNMI to become a lawyer, and she was the first lawyer to ever serve in the CNMI legislature. She was known for many other things, including singing, community activism, and art. She was also one of the pioneers of the environmental movement in the CNMI. In January 2007, almost 20 years ago, Sinta invited me to a meeting in her office on Capitol Hill with a man named Jay Nelson, an organization I had heard of, but didn't really know that much about. It was called the Pew Trusts. Mr. Nelson was from Alaska and had just recently worked on securing a large protected area in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. It was so successful that Pew and its funders were looking for communities around the world that could model their ocean conservation after what had just happened in Hawaii. They were looking for places that were large, historically, mostly unfished, and a country with a history of conservation and with some hope of enforcement. We met with Mr. Nelson for 2 hours that day. The waters around the Marianas are indeed large, at over 1 million square kilometers, and we haven't had any large-scale commercial fishing in our waters for many decades. And we are territory owned by, but not part of the United States. So for the most part, the same laws that apply to Hawaii apply to us. Sinta and I discussed this, and knowing what we know about our islands, suggested that back then, and again, remember, this was 2007, I admit that a lot has happened since then, we thought that protecting the waters around our sanctuary islands seemed reasonable. We were very clear that we were only interested in the waters around the 3 far northern islands. And during that discussion, I pointed out that the northern portion of the Mariana Trench extended to this area. We agreed in that meeting that the name Mariana Trench Marine National Monument was a very good name. And we parted ways with a commitment to continue the discussion later. Next slide, please. And that conversation continued over the next 2 years, mostly in the CNMI. Cinta and I, with the support of our networks and families, and yes, Pew, put together this proposal. It was a huge marine protected area, taking up about 1/3 of the US EEZ that would be off limits to industrial fishing, but allow indigenous fishing. Fishing is important to our culture, and it was important that our practices be allowed to continue. This was always a part of our proposal. Next slide. We were joined by ocean advocates like Ike Cabrera, Lori Paterka, Andrew Salas, Andrew McFeeters, Tina Sablon, Ed Salas, Ed Probst, Wes Bogdan, Chuck Sion, Ruth Tai, Chai-Ling Palacios, Harry Blaylock, Mike Tripp, Aya and William Matsumoto, Marites Castillo, Mr. Horiguchi, Dave Sablon, Jane Mack, and many, many more that I'm surely forgetting. These people came together to form the Friends of the Mariana Trench, who led the public engagement in the community from the summer of 2008 until the designation in 2009. On the day of the monument's designation in January 2009, after a public campaign to build support, Governor Fitial, Senate President Regis, and House Speaker Palacios announced their support publicly for the designation of the monument. This was in large part due to the overwhelming local support at the time and the intense public campaign. Now, there's a much longer discussion to have about the monument. I've written and spoken about its strengths, its weaknesses, and its shortcomings at great length over the last 20 years. But today, I'm happy that there are finally staff, and there's an office on Saipan. They are conducting programs with our community. There's a visitor contact station in Garapan, and a management plan was published in 2024. I actually had the honor to introduce the Secretary of Interior when she made the announcement in Washington, DC. But this is actually supposed to be a talk on deep sea mining, so I'm going to skip over many of those details and stories from that time. But if anybody ever wants to talk about that, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you. Next slide, please. So, although we did not discuss it much during the recent RFI process, the Mariana Trench Monument is relevant to the new threats of deep sea mining. While the Friends of the Mariana Trench had asked for a huge monument, which was about 300,000 square kilometers, that restricted commercial fishing around the 3 northern islands, the Bush administration ultimately decided on something else. The Bush administration protected about 50,000 square kilometers of waters around the 3 northern islands from industrial commercial fishing, with allowances for several types of small-scale fishing, as the Friends of the Mariana Trench had requested. This area is called the Islands Unit of the Mariana Trench Monument. It makes up about 5% of the US EEZ around our islands. It's that orange bit on the map there. But Bush also created a protected area for the seafloor in the Mariana Trench, which is around almost 1,000 miles long, extending north of Uracas and south of Guam. This area bans deep sea mining in an area of about 200,000 square kilometers, about 20% of the US EEZ around our waters. And it is due to the Mariana Trench Monument that the proposed deep sea mining is restricted to the far eastern edge of the ocean in our waters. So let me just say that again to be clear. About 25% of the waters surrounding our islands are permanently off limits to deep sea mining because of the Mariana Trench Monument. Next slide, please. But the monument does not protect the other 75% of the waters around our islands. But thankfully, across the Marianas and with our diaspora, a new generation of ocean stewards has stepped up to lead our people. They were some of the first to raise the alarm about the threats of deep sea mining imposed by the Trump administration. Until last year, I personally never thought deep sea mining would be a threat in our waters. It's an unproven technology. It's been science fiction since the 1950s. I even remember a few years ago, after the monument was designated, a geologist came out to Saipan to talk about deep sea mining, and he gave a presentation to our government agencies and community. He said that if there was ever deep sea mining, the market could probably only handle one deep sea mine because too many mines would flood the market with products and drive down the price. I also always assumed the environmental laws of the United States would make our waters unattractive to extractive industries that tend to prefer to work in corrupt countries where they can buy off officials to avoid environmental laws. Now, apologies to some of you. I'm going to get political here, but the United States is now one of those corrupt countries, thanks to President Donald Trump. Trump campaigned on drill, baby, drill. And he's committed to selling off American natural resources to corporations and billionaires. This isn't liberal hyperbole. There are processes happening right now that would sell oil drilling rights off the coast of Florida, California, and Alaska. There's talk of selling off public lands to build data centers, and they're pushing deep sea mining in American Samoa, the Marianas, and now Alaska. And the United States has overturned or walked away from nearly every domestic or international climate and environment commitment made in the last century. Now, this talk will be followed by an hour-long discussion on the recent 60-day RFI for deep sea mining. And I want to be very careful that I do not speak on behalf of any of the organizations and efforts that led that effort locally. But please allow me to discuss how I experienced it from Washington, D.C. Next slide. On November 11th, virtually no one in the Marianas had heard of deep sea mining. The next day, the Trump administration announced a 30-day plan to begin the process that could open areas near the Mariana Trench to industrial extraction. This timeline was abrupt, the issue was unfamiliar, and our community was completely unprepared for it. With no resources, no prepared messaging, and no existing coalitions, we had to build a comprehensive campaign from scratch, and we had to do it quickly. One of the most important lessons from this effort is that even under intense pressure, it's critical to take the time at the beginning to frame the issue correctly. Before collecting signatures, before building a petition, before mobilizing the public, we listened to my friend Sheila and we gathered allies, both locally and nationally. We consolidated our understanding of the threat and we created shared language that the community could use. One way to think about this threat is through a framework I learned as a science communicator. It's a simple risk communication structure called hazard, impact, and action. The hazard for us was defined clearly. The federal government intended to mine the deep sea near our islands. The impact was broadened beyond just environmental consequences to include economic concerns and questions of sovereignty. For many, this proposal represented a continuation of historical patterns of decisions imposed by outside actors without local input. And the action was straightforward. Submit public comments, sign letters, sign petitions, send them off to the Federal Register. So as a board member with the Friends of the Mariana Trench and in support of this risk communication structure, we created and continuously updated an educational document that lived on Google Docs. It became the central resource for our efforts, and we recognized there were other parallel efforts too. But we shared our document widely on social media, discussed it on local radio, and we directed community partners to use it as the basis for their own outreach. Our messaging was organized across 3 frames because different segments of the community connect to different rationales. First, we communicated the environmental risks using the best available science. Second, we made clear that the economic benefits would not accrue to the island communities, but to distant companies and individual investors. And third, we addressed the issue as a matter of indigenous sovereignty in neo-colonialism, including concerns about military expansion. Effective risk communication requires meeting people where they are, not expecting them to change their values to match your argument. We also emphasized procedural justice. The public comment period overlapped Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. This was a timeline that made meaningful participation difficult, and we repeatedly highlighted this as an example of an unfair process. We even criticized the decision to extend the comment period because it was far too short and the timeline was not controlled locally. So, although the request for information process began on November 12th, we did not start collecting petition signatures until November 20. The science letter started by Tano Tasi Zantodzu, which we also supported, was open to signatures on November 24. This deliberate pacing allowed us to strengthen the message before amplifying it. This also gave us the time to ensure key allies were on board. Our loose coalition had multiple captains rowing in different boats, each with their own style, but with a little coordination, we managed to at least row our collective armada in the same direction. The results demonstrate the effectiveness of these strategies. The 30-day comment period was extended to 60 days, and by the end, the national and local coalition partners submitted 60,000 comments, letters, and petitions. We went from no awareness to a mass mobilization in a short period, not by overwhelming people with information, but by communicating risk in a way that was structured, accessible, and relevant. Now, this was not the first time, and it will not be the last time that our community has to deal with outside forces trying to tell us what to do with our ocean. Next slide, please. Science has given this 21st century reality a name. It's called the Blue Acceleration. This was work led by Jean-Baptiste Joffre. I actually realized I didn't put the name on the slide, and I should have. Bad. Researchers describe this as a global race among competing interests, all clamoring for food, material, and space from the sea, at a scale and a pace humanity has never experienced before. If you look around the world, the pattern repeats. Fishing communities are fighting to maintain access to traditional grounds. Sanctuaries and protected areas are sparking debate over conservation versus livelihoods. Deep sea mining companies want to tap the seabed for minerals. Offshore wind developers are staking out vast swaths of ocean for turbines. And agencies grapple with designating critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act. Each of these issues may seem distinct, but they're all drawing from the same limited resource, and that's ocean space. This unprecedented competition echoes exactly what the Blue Acceleration research warns about. It's the rapid expansion and industrialization of ocean uses, from aquaculture and bioprospecting to offshore energy and seabed mining. Scientists have shown that today's aspirations for the ocean are more extensive, intense, and diverse than at any point in human history. As demand grows, these pressures only multiply. And communities, especially small islands and indigenous peoples, are often the ones left to navigate the consequences. What's striking is that no generation before ours has had to contend with this sheer density of competing uses. The Blue Acceleration is a uniquely 21st century challenge. Just a few decades ago, many of today's industries, deep sea mining, offshore wind, high seas bioprospecting, were barely imaginable. But technological advances and declining land-based resources have pushed more and more human activity out to sea. And now communities everywhere are finding themselves on the front lines of decisions that pit jobs against conservation, energy development against cultural values, national economic ambitions against local ways of life. The challenge before us isn't just balancing one ocean use against another, it's learning how to govern a marine world where everything is happening all at once, faster than ever before. The Blue Acceleration framework helps us see that our local debates, whether it's about fishing, protected areas, endangered species habitat, offshore wind, deep sea mining, are part of a much larger global story. So here's where I want to leave you tonight, or this morning for all of you back at home. The forces shaping our ocean future are big, fast, and global. But the decisions about what happens in our waters should be made by our people, not in some distant capital, not by government bureaucrats that can't even pronounce our names, who don't know our stories or our history. It needs to be the people of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands setting the agenda for these big ocean ideas. So are we going to allow deep sea mining? God, I hope not. But if we decide that's our path, then we must demand a system that ensures the benefits flow to our communities, not outsiders who take the wealth and leave us with the risk. Are we going to set aside iconic special ocean places, our seamounts, our reefs, our ancestral ocean spaces? I hope so. But then we need real plans, real policies. We need money. We need real accountability on the people who pull the levers of power in Washington, D.C. And the benefits need to flow to our conservation organizations, our scientists, and our communities, and not only benefit those who live far away. So last slide. So I'm going to finish this talk in the same place that I started, and I went faster than I thought I would. One of the things we realized when we visited Mog is that we never left our home. The youngest member of our crew, 18-year-old Dennis Chan, wrote of our trip, "I never really left home, did I? I traveled for nearly 2 days nonstop to reach Mog, and when I arrived, I was still home. I was still in the Marianas." Those of us who call the Marianas home are the proud stewards of 10% of all US waters. We are not just island communities. We are ocean people. We are navigators. We are stewards. Our ancestors read the waves, understood the currents, and built societies that thrived because they respected the sea. Now it's our turn. This is our chance to show the world what true ocean conservation looks like. Leadership rooted in community, culture, and courage. Everyone in a canoe, rowing in the same direction. So let's be good ancestors, make decisions that our grandchildren will thank us for. Thank you. God bless all of you. God bless Guam. God bless the Northern Mariana Islands. And if you click one more time, if anybody wants a free copy of Dennis's book where he wrote that, you can scan that and it'll pull up a PDF. Guys, I was very nervous. I just want you to know that. That's why I talked so fast.
You did a wonderful job, Angelo.
There's
Hopefully, yeah,
there's
hopefully you'll
talk.
be willing to stick around for
Yep.
questions since we do have a lot of time.
Yeah. There's talking to there's talking to a bunch of scientists, but then there's talking to like people at home, and like the stakes are just so much higher talking to all of you. So just thank you again for the opportunity to speak today and for letting me tell my story. I appreciate it.
Sizus Maasi, Angelo. Yeah, that was really wonderful. So I think we'll give it to the audience now. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand and you should be able to unmute yourself. We're also watching the Zoom chat, so you can type your questions as well if you want. A lot of thank yous
It's
and
always
Yeah,
also
hard.
also,
apology.
That's
Oh,
okay.
go ahead.
yeah.
I was say it's always hard to get started. People are shy in the beginning to ask questions. So uh, floor is open though.
I will say I apologize for the mistake in your birthplace.
It's no worries. I mean, I'm from Saipan. I was on Guam for like 3 days before they went back to Saipan. So
Okay.
I think it's because like in the 1970s, if you were on Saipan and you could be born on Guam, you were because the hospital was a lot safer.
Makes sense. So Senator Perez actually has a question. She's asking, what are the next steps to stop deep sea mining?
Yeah, I think I'll quote Sheila Babauta. I think the immediate step is to continue to seek out allies and to build our networks. We're kind of in a waiting period right now, right? So the everybody, our 60,000 comments are in. The feds are probably just feeding them into an AI machine and will spit it back out. And they're probably going to throw out 55,000 comments like they did in American Samoa. But the next step for the federal government is that they will respond to all the comments in a very long document, and they will identify the area of identification, which is the area where they think that they could allow deep sea mining in our waters. And then after that area of identification, they have to do environmental review. The uh, the sand in the gears here is that BOEM, they just came out to Guam and CNMI, met with our leaders, made a whole bunch of promises of the outreach that they were going to do, while at the same exact time they have a public comment period uh, to change the rules in the middle of the game, where they wouldn't have to reach out to the local communities and the local government. So they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth, and it's hard to know what to believe with the leadership in this administration. But I would say Trump backs off a lot of things. Like, you remember Doge? Remember, like when everybody was like upset about Doge, and they were, he had the Elon Musk had the chainsaw, and they were cutting government. That was wildly unpopular, and it's gone. And I think really the Trump has shown that he does respond to public outrage. And so for those of you who are out there raising hell, keep it up. You're doing a great job.
There's another question in the chat from Nate Rigler, um, and he's wondering about the collaboration with the communities in Samoa and Alaska.
Yeah, I'm a DC guy, and I have my personal networks in DC. I belong to several national coalitions, and I'm a board member of the Friends of the Mariana Trench still, so I have connections to local organizations. Um, the American Samoa was a very different experience in that there was sort of one government official that was the filter through which everything went through. Whereas in CNMI and Guam, we had like 20 leaders, right? Like community members, senators, out there uh, organizing our people against this. Um, the different national coalitions are in touch with the local communities and the local groups in Alaska and American Samoa. And the national organizations are just as diverse as all of you back at home, right? So like some of the national organizations are like, oh, we're deadly opposed to this. We're going to jump in. We're going to get a letter going. We're opposed to this. Whereas like some of the other national organizations are like a little bit more tepid, and they want to make sure that the governor makes a statement before they come out and make a statement. So there's a number of people in all of these communities. There's a number of people in Washington D.C. who are trying to herd these cats. But to say that it's one effort, it's not. It's a lot of little efforts.
So, if I may, I actually have a question for you, Angelo. I feel like there's a bit of overlap in some of our interests with conservation, but letting kind of indigenous people lead the way in how and where and all the details of how that actually plays out. And I think that sometimes, and I think maybe you've talked about this before, that can sometimes be at odds with some of these bigger initiatives that are very percentage driven, setting aside 30% and whatnot. And where is that going to go, right? I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on that.
I'm not sure I heard the question. Uh,
Oh,
uh,
would you like me to say it again?
yeah.
Sure. Okay. So my question concerns some of these bigger initiatives
Okay.
especially with setting aside percentages. I know you're a strong advocate for Indigenous-led conservation, and I'm wondering how you kind of balance both of those because sometimes those
Yeah.
ideas
Okay.
can be a little bit at odds. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. And actually, I put some slides at the end of my presentation to talk about this because I thought it might come up. Um, but so like 30 by 30, which I was an advocate for. Micro, where I learned about area targets on Saipan because of the Micronesia Challenge, which that was Willie Koska at MCT, who got all of the presidents, and it was led by the presidents. But he'll tell you the way it started is they were going to do a project with FSM in Palau, but then it turned out everybody in Micronesia wanted to be a part of it. Um, and the thing that the Micronesia Challenge does differently than the national or the national and the international stuff is the way you measure success. Uh, the Micronesia Challenge, like each of the islands come up with their own metrics. And like at the end of the day, like Micronesia Challenge means we want more conservation, we want better conservation, we want faster conservation, and we need more funding. And the inspiration for 30 by 30 at the national and the global level, it was the same thing. We need more conservation. And during the Biden years, like the amount of money that went to conservation initiatives was off the charts. Like more money going to conservation initiatives than in the history of the United States. And so by that measure, it was successful. But where 30 by 30 falls apart is when you try to measure it and when you have to agree on what does conservation mean? What does beautiful mean? Right? Like these are terms that we all hold slightly differently. Um, and so at Center for American Progress, during the Biden, like also in the United States, 30 by 30 is gone. Like we've Trump administration has, on day one, walked us away from all of that. Um, but under when Biden was president, we Cap tried to tell the larger groups is like it's actually like we shouldn't be arguing over the percentages. It's more of like, is there a management plan? Did funding go there? Did the people support it? Do they is there a place where they can read what the rules are? Um, and that can be hard because a lot of conservation money comes from California, comes from Silicon Valley, comes from businessmen, and it gets communicated in terms of investment. And it's just, square kilometers is easier to measure than vibes. And then, until somebody asks more questions, and so I was born in the 70s. Um, when I was a kid, it was about save the rainforest, save the whales. Maybe like 20 years ago, it was like that's when climate change started becoming an important issue. About 6 years ago, it was equity because of George Floyd. And 30 by 30, it's time limited. Like it's going to be around for a certain number of years, and then eventually something else will replace it. But at the core, whatever replaces it is just going to be, I love nature. I love fish. I want more of them in the ocean. Um, yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Oh, we've got another question. So Kira Houston, hi Kira. You mentioned this briefly earlier in the presentation, but I would like to hear more about your thoughts on getting people invested in environmental conservation through reminding people of their love of the ocean.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I appreciate that, Kiara. Uh, I think conservation has kind of missed the boat when it comes to why we protect things. And if you think about the big social movements in the United States, you think of like the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement. It's not based in science. When did conservation become based in science? Like that was a change, and like it just kind of happened slowly. And I think for a lot of us who are maybe studying science or we work in conservation, we say things like, "Oh, we have to take a science-based approach." Um, but it's actually our values that science can tell us really important stuff, but it can't tell us what to do, and it can't tell us, more importantly, it can't tell us how to do it, and it can't tell us who to do it with. And so uh, I actually like I'm not gonna. I guess we're not gonna pull up the slides, but um, I the next the thing that I think will emerge post 30 by 30 um, is just more nearshore conservation because just if you ask if you're ever in a Zoom meeting and you have to do one of those awkward everybody has to introduce themselves with a fun fact, ask them to describe their special ocean place. And if you're an ocean conservationist, you're just going to get some like amazing responses because we all have these core memories from when we were children. Even if you didn't grow up on an island, maybe you live in Ohio, but you went to the Bahamas during your spring break, and just you fell in love with the ocean. And we've been so focused on science-based decision making that we've kind of missed the boat on love-based decision making when it comes to ocean and in culture-based decision. Yeah, so go down a little bit. Go to yeah, that's me holding a shark. Go down one more. Oh yeah, okay. So so this is what happens with 30 by 30. So the polygons are all of the protected areas in the United States. And if you draw a line between Hawaii and California, click the slide. 99% of the protected areas are in the Pacific, but 99% of the people are in the lower 48. And so, that creates issues of, that's not scientifically sound. Like that creates issues of ecological representation. Like we're only protecting these pelagic areas in the Pacific. What about the kelp off the coast of California? But there's also like some massive inequities in this where all of the burdens are carried by the Pacific Islands, and all the benefits accrue to like the University of Washington. Uh, Sorry, Heldra, where those big boats come out, and we might get like one berth, two berths, and the questions that are being asked to study our waters aren't being asked by our scientists. There's people from the mainland who are traveling to our islands, and we don't have any control over that. So next slide. The cool thing is most Americans actually live near the coast, 40%. And I won't bore you with the last, but we have a report if you're interested in looking it up. It's called the CAP Nearshore Ocean Progress Report. But we lay out how there are 6 habitats. I keep looking through. There are 6 habitats that people love kelp, people love oysters, people love coral reefs. So we're trying to develop a framework where people focus on these 6 habitats instead of just area targets. You can take the presentation down. Thank you.
Thanks, Angelo. Yeah, that really resonates with me. I always thought that in order to do conservation, I had to become a biologist. And while I'm very thankful for that journey, I always say that conservation really needs more artists and lawyers and business people and, just people who can connect across more communities. It's not just about the science. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Are there any other questions for Angelo?
I'll ask one. So you mentioned that there's not a lot of representation in DC, at least in think tanks, but I think that goes through a lot of the agencies as well. And I'm wondering, I mean, I think that there part of that is it's a challenge. Like you're not close to your special ocean places, so you're living in a very different urban setting. And certainly there's some benefits, but like there's also lots of drawbacks. But I'm wondering, so I guess I'm wondering one, like how someone would make, if you think of the next generation coming in, how do they make a career in DC? Like, how do you change that? And what are some of the barriers that you faced, and that maybe we can find ways of kind of having better representation without having everyone need to live in DC all of the time?
Yeah, I think this is a career choice, and it's a good career. I kind of fell into it. I don't like. I look back. I'm like, how did this happen? Why am I here? Um, I, if you want to get into like the international policy world, there are several fellowships that you can apply for. Like one of them is Earth Echo. One of them is the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. Like they just had a thing to sign up for. 'Cause, the thing in DC is it's policy town. It's where the money is. It's where the decisions are made. And so like my life is writing memos, and so you have to enjoy writing memos, and public speaking and doing things like that. But yeah, like you don't necessarily have to be a scientist. Like you can be a lawyer, and it is far away. Um, Post COVID, there are increasing opportunities for remote work. Um, but there a lot of the places do want you if you want to do policy work. Usually, you're like either in the UN in New York or the UN in Europe, or Washington D.C. If anybody wants to talk about that, like and how to break in, I'm happy. Reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you to people. And it's actually like the connecting you to people that matters. It's like the hardest is to get the first person in the door. But then, that person's job is to keep their foot in the door so that more people can follow, and, make you aware of opportunities. Because, I've had a good career. I've done some cool stuff, written a lot of memos.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I was struck with that, with the deep sea mining response. Like it was really helpful to have people on the inside in DC that knew a lot of what was going on at the policy level, and then to have people on the ground. Like it was just it's valuable to have that insight and have that there be a strong connection there. So thank you for all the work you do.
I guess I can also put in a plug for maybe not hesitating to start locally. I know that there are some limitations to that, but there are definitely ways to get involved. We're hoping TTT can provide more of those outlets for people as well.
I started locally. That's how you start.
Exactly.
Can I just have one more question? Sorry, Angelo, great talk. Really appreciated your background. I think it's the first time I actually met you, but so it's wonderful to get that connection with you. Considering what Trump has done to NEPA, has there been any kind of analysis on how that's going to impact, for instance, like comments towards the MIT, for instance, that's coming up, the Mariana Islands Testing and Training. Yeah, has there been any analysis, and what can we do as far as connecting, more, be more, I guess, robust in our comments and getting heard, basically.
Well, I follow you on Instagram, so it's great to also meet you in person. Um, I it's, what they're doing is bad, and they're trying to cut red tape, make it easier for America to be great. And there's no one right answer. If there was one right answer, the person who had it could be the president in a couple of years. And I think the strategy is actually everything. We will fight you in the court of public opinion. We will fight you in the courts. We will fight you at the polls eventually. We will pass local laws that make it difficult for you to do the things that you want to do. We will hold hearings in the Congress and slow things down. We will shut down the government, as what they're doing right now because of the situation in Minneapolis. But really, like a lot of this is a democracy problem, and it can be a democracy solution. I know that at home it can just feel like it's the federal government, but Trump is something new. Like we've never dealt with this before, and it's bad. I know people at home like Trump. They watch a lot of Fox News.
I think there's time for just this one last question that's popped up in the chat. I'm looking at my organizers. Is that okay? All right. So Rick Camp writes, over the last 10 to 20 years, there's been a push to include local knowledge in conservation. Has there been a similar change in the policy world and our decision makers listening to personal stories?
I would say there was during the Biden years. The Department of Interior had lots of great programs. They had an ocean justice strategy. They had an indigenous knowledge. I forget the exact phrasing of it, but it was sort of like an indigenous knowledge guidebook is the wrong name, but I didn't work for them, so I don't actually know what they called it. And then on the international stage, increasingly, the first time I saw Indigenous added at some of the international language was about 2016, so about 10 years ago. And working with Indigenous peoples or working with people of color, Black people, whatever, it's a journey. And the first step is you let them in the room. The second step is you let them be who they are. And for a lot of these initiatives, they've only taken that first step where they're like, all right, we'll let one guy in the room. And there's still a long way to go. And some of these international structures are just structured against Indigenous peoples. Like the UN is made up of countries, and Indigenous peoples are non-state actors for the most part. The United States does not recognize the Chamorro or Carolinian people as an indigenous group. We are not a tribe. We do not get the same level of recognition as the Native Hawaiians. The Native Hawaiians have certain agreements in place where they get consultation on things. We don't have that as a people. CNMI has the 902 talks, but that's territory to federal. It's not indigenous government to federal government. And I actually think that there could be opportunities for Chamorros and Rafalawash to gain the same recognition as Native Hawaiians, but it's not going to happen under Trump. It's going to have to happen under a president who's more interested in those sorts of things.
Well, thanks for that, Angelo. We'll give you another virtual round of applause. Thanks again. Here's my clap emoji. There we go. And I believe now we're going to go ahead and move into our first break.